So we're doing houseplants in a small space. We're kind of just going to go over some good houseplants when you have an apartment, a dorm, or just, you know, a small house where you only want houseplants in like a little area instead of having, you know, giant trees all over the place. We'll talk about how to put them up, you know, like the type of hardware and, you know, what you need to get them set up in their location. And then we'll talk a little bit about caring for smaller plants in a small space, because it's a little bit different when you're working with like an apartment or a dorm. Okay, so houseplants that work in a small space, normally you're going to want things that aren't bushy usually, and you're going to want things that don't grow super tall. Usually is what people are looking for. And a lot of times, the way I picture it is kind of windowsill gardening a little bit. So that's kind of the image I have in my head, and maybe the image to keep in your guys' head the whole time. You see a lot of, like, you know, the big shelving units in people's houses, and they got a lot of tiny plants. That's kind of also where my brain is with this too. Okay, so we'll jump right into the plants. So I have them.
Do these flower?
Yes, that's a Hoya.
I know, but they do flower, cool flowers?
Yes, fragrant too. Thanks, RB. So I just divided them by light because usually that's everybody's limiting factor in their small space. A lot of times small spaces also have small windows, so we don't have a lot of light. I did a few bright light. The Echeveria is like, I'm trying to see if there's not one with where I can reach. It's the one that looks really symmetrical, and you see it, yeah, right there. That's one. That's an Echeveria. I was gonna grab the plants. So this is an Echeveria, and I like these for indoor in small spaces, because when you get plants like the Buddha's temple, like this guy, this works too, but more the point I'm trying to make is ones where it's a stem and a leaf. They tend to get a little bit gangly when you have them, you know, in a windowsill or something like that, and they'll get kind of weird because they get too long and then they start dropping their lower leaves. And so I usually go for succulents that look more like this. And it's just because of their growth habit is a little bit better in small space and low light. There's a few, I can't think of the names, but like the jelly beans is a type of succulent, and like those, they just get so long and just doesn't work when you're trying to have a small plant like right here, and you don't want it all over the place. Jade is good. It does eventually get really big, but not so big that you can't handle it and it takes so long. It's pretty much just a small plant. Cactus, little tiny cactus, they don't grow, you know, so they're good for a small space in bright light. Hoyas, which he just grabbed, this one's a Hoya right here. I like those for small space because I have like 4 or 5 of them at home, because you can hang them, and hanging things works a lot better because you're not taking up floor space where you want your couch or your whatever. And Hoyas, they grow relatively slow, and you can do so much with them. You can, train them along the ceiling, the vines. You can do them up a totem or on a trellis, which can be confined to a small space. And they do flower, which is fun. You don't find that a lot in houseplants. It's hard to get them to flower, but they do flower. And Hoyas will tolerate kind of dim conditions, but they do like a little bit brighter light. They'll never flower if they don't get like enough light. Haworthia is another one that's good. That's zebra, the zebra one. It looks like aloe, but it's got like the white stripes on it. That one is really good for indoors, and it actually likes dimmer light. And yeah, there was another one. I think it was just Howarthia. And then the Gasteria, I think is what it's called. It's called Little Warty. We have a couple of them, and they're a good one for inside too, because they just don't get very big. Low light air plants can go in pretty low light situations, and they're really good in the kitchen and the bathroom. So a lot of times when you don't have a lot of space, you end up putting plants in like places that most people don't put plants, like their bathroom. It's kind of becoming trendy to put plants in the bathroom, but some people, you don't think of it because sometimes it doesn't have a window. They would prefer a kitchen or a bathroom just because it's high humidity, but otherwise you just missed them. Pothos, people don't typically think of that as a small plant, but it's the same thing with the Hoya. You can train the vines along the ceiling or have it hanging down on a shelf, and it does pretty well in that situation. Some philodendron, like we have right now, Little Phil, and it's just, we have it in a 4-inch, and it's like a little, its leaves are kind of long and skinny, and it'll kind of just make like a little bushy plant, rather than a lot of philodendrons tend to be kind of rambly. They kind of go all around. And some of the bigger ones can get, you know, like the split leaf philodendron can get absolutely massive. So there's that one. There's Little Hope is a really nice small philodendron, and then Hope is just a little bit bigger. And then the heartleaf, a lot of times people confuse it with pothos, the heartleaf philodendron. Philodendron cordatum, that one is a good one for small spaces too, but they can get pretty big if you let them. Snake plants, obvious choice. You can get little tiny ones, and they look tiny for almost their whole life. So those ones are a good one. And then, you know, a lot of times when people are putting plants in a small space, they want something that's not bushy, like I said in the beginning, and the snake plants just kind of do that for most of the varieties. There is the pencil one that kind of goes all over the place, but that one's fernwood actually. Ferns, pretty much any fern is going to be in a small space except for the Boston ferns, obviously, because they're huge. But most ferns like staghorn, heart fern, any of the footed ferns are going to be good. Button fern, all those are going to be good in a small space. Chinese evergreen is kind of like a border plant. It can get pretty big, but they're not something that gets absolutely massive. They're pretty, over time they can get pretty tall, but it takes so long and they grow so slow. And they do super well in low light and low water. So I really like that one for small spaces if you want kind of like an accent plant and you're not the kind of person that does the little plants all over the place. Peperomia, that's a good one. It grows pretty slow in the house, and it's a little trailing plant, and even when they're old, they're not very big. They kind of look like a Hoya how they grow a little bit, because they kind of vine slowly and kind of build on themselves. Calathea, I wrote Calathea and family because that includes like the stromanths and prayer plants, anything in that Maranta family. Yeah, let's see, there's one right there, and I think that's the only one I put in here. Yeah, oh yeah, I kind of have like a sampling of everything in here. Yeah, these do well in small spaces. They don't get, eventually they can get bigger, but they really don't, especially in your house. Shamrocks are good. They're a littler guy. And it's a good thing for, like, you know, on your kitchen counter to look pretty for a while. They seem to decline, but they like to go out in the summer, so that will help them. Cape primrose, you guys may or may not know about that one. We have a few of them. Its flower looks similar to an African violet, and its leaf looks similar, but its leaf is really long, but it's kind of that same fuzzy texture. So it's a really neat one. It blooms in the house really consistently. They spread. So keep it in, if you kept in like a shallow dish, you could probably keep it in a pretty tight spot on a windowsill. You could do it in like a window box sort of dish and put it on there, and it would spread through. They spread by runners. It's pretty neat. They will fill a pot really quick. ZZs, they just grow so slow. They can get huge, but if you get them little, they grow really, really slow. They can, they get their long things, so you just can cut them off. I put ivy on here. It's not really a small plant, but I put it on there because it can be cut back pretty hard. So we'll talk about that a little bit in care with keeping plants in a smaller area. But with ivy, it's just so usually vigorous enough that in the spring you can give it a really intense haircut and it'll just come right back over the summer. So yeah, does anybody have any questions or any other plants that they can think of that they like in a small space?
I like the wandering Jew.
Oh yeah, the wandering Jew is a really good one. Pretty much any viney plant is good because you can hang it and it just kind of takes up that space over there that you're not really using. So yeah. Okay, so where can we put plants when we're in a small space? We've kind of talked about hanging plants. I like to do macrame with plants just because it looks nice, and it's a little bit easier. I think it's easier to deal with because the pot and the macrame are separate, rather than having the hanger on the pot, because you can just take the whole unit, put it in the sink, and you can, it doesn't have to be a hanging plant for its whole life. You could put it on a shelf if you wanted to, just take it out of the macrame. And it's cute, honestly. That's the main reason. And I've seen there's things that you can put on the wall that then stick out like about maybe that far from your wall, and it's got a little hook on the end, and then you hang a plant from that. So that's a good thing, for people that have a lot of plants. That really opens up your space rather than having to drill holes in the ceiling and hope that you get it in the spot that is right. So I don't know, do you guys ever drill into the ceiling to put plants up?
I was actually going to do that idea, but do dowels or something so you can hang more than one.
Yeah. I think I'm going to buy the ladder from her in her vintage vixens over there, but I've seen where they took like an old ladder and they hung it kind of like how this lattice is hung from, they like hung it from the ceiling, and then they hung houseplants from that. And I thought that was super cute and a really good use of space. And so they did it like above a couch. So, I mean, provided you're watering somewhere else, that would work pretty good. So anything like that. I've done a lot of ceiling drilling, and it doesn't always go super well, but usually I have my dad come over and help me. But it's hard because you almost just like have to hit a stud. Otherwise, you have to have a stud finder. It's just a hassle. But I just like hanging my houseplants from my ceiling. So, shelving is great. Shelf on every single window, and you can get all kinds of plants in there. There's shelves that hang from the windows, that like hook up on the top. I've seen that before, or that will like little windowsill shelves. Have you guys ever seen those? It's like it either sits on the windowsill or I think it sits on the windowsill. It must, and then there'll be like 3 or 4 plants on it. I think that's cute and a good way to not have just one flat surface. Terrariums, you can have a terrarium is like it's a statement. You have this big cool thing, and you can get them. I mean, you have little ones too, And then you can have a bunch of different plants in there, and it's like a little ecosystem. That's a good way when you have a small space and you just you can do a little tiny terrarium on the windowsill and it'll pretty much sustain itself. And you can put all kinds of stuff in it. Mixed planters. There was a girl that came in today and she picked out a few different ferns and she was going to mix those together, and I thought that was a really good idea. You know, if you're somebody that wants to have, you know, you're like, oh well, I like these 3 ferns but I don't really have a spot for 3 ferns, you can just plant them all in the same pot. I like the idea of things, you know, things like this, like mixed containers. And then, you know, you have your statement piece, but you have multiple plants in it. So you get to kind of see a little bit of everything. As somebody who, I just like to watch them grow, and I want to watch all of them grow. That's a good thing. And you get to see how they interact with each other too, which is a lot of fun. I really like mixed planters. I'd like to do some more of them. I've seen, I think my favorite one right now is I saw a picture of one that landscapers had done like in Florida or something, and it was donkey tail on the outside and then cyclamen planted around in the, and there was like a palm or something in the middle, but then there was cyclamen on the inner circle, and I thought that was such a neat idea. And both of those plants can kind of deal with the same water situation. So, I mean, that's the only consideration, is they just all have to be, you know, succulents, or they all have to be tropical, or, you know, something like that. But I did mix, like there's a Hoya in here, along with, you know, ivy and things that, and the calathea, things that really would like higher water. But they seem to be happy, even though they don't, oh, there just goes a leaf. Even though, you know, it's such a mixture of different ones. It's kind of amazing how adaptable they can be to situations like that. Wall-mounted plants, that's a good one. I think that's something that I don't see as much of as I would like to in Spokane. I hear about it, but people don't say, oh, I have a wall-mounted plant. And I see them all the time in like Portland and Seattle. Those nurseries really go crazy with the wall-mounted thing. And I've seen, like, they'll even do Hoyas. They do the kokodamas a lot. I'll see Hoyas, like, they put them on like a piece of bark, kind of, and then they plant it back behind moss, and then it hangs on that. And you could hang a gazillion of those all over your house, no matter how big or small it is, or even, you know, right on a window. Actually, the kokodamas are a good small space thing, because they really don't take up that much space, even less than a lot of hanging baskets do. And I've even seen them hung from fishing line. So it just is like a floating plant ball. I think that's fun. Okay, and I put lights in this category because it's kind of like hardware. When you have a smaller space, again, usually smaller windows, but that's an advantage, because if you use plant lights, you only have 1 or 2 areas you have to light. You know, you don't have plants all over your house. And so it's a lot easier to light up an area this big than it is to light up a whole room. And a lot of times, you know, plant lights really make the difference between having really healthy plants like Hoyas and, you know, having something that's just kind of growing at just a tiny little bit a year, which I guess if you don't have a lot of room, you don't want things to grow super quick, but it does make them really happy. And there's so many different options. They tend to be kind of industrial looking, but there's a lot of, because the houseplant trend is coming up, there's a lot of companies that are starting to come out with like trendy looking lighting. And it's really neat because it doesn't, you know, impede on how your space looks. And it ends up looking really nice, actually. So yeah, any questions about any of that? Comments? Okay. So with houseplants in a small space, and obviously it's the same care usually, but there's a little bit, you know, if you're somebody that lives in a dorm, which are any of you in probably, okay, apartments though. You guys are, no?
I have a house.
Okay. You're still gardening in like a little area. Yeah. You're not working with a lot, so you can't have like, you know, all these dishes under everything. And for me, it's hard for me to do that because I have all my plants on this shelf and the dishes don't necessarily all fit together, and like I want to put plants, you know, everywhere. Something that I do is put multiple plants in a dish. So like I have this little shelf and it's got corners, so it's like 3 areas and then it's like 4 tiers, I think. And the little corner is pretty small, but I put a little plastic dish on there, and then I have a big plant in the back, and then I do like little ones around the front, and then it makes it easy to water. One thing I like about having a lot of smaller plants, I'm that kind of person, I'm the shelf with like way too many plants on it, is you can just put them all in the bathtub or put them all in the sink one day and just give them a good, you know, a good rinse down and you're good. It just makes it, I don't know, I think that's easier than having a gazillion dishes all over the place, and it's a lot less, it's easy, you just clean your sink and then, you know, it makes less of a mess. So I don't know, that's kind of an opinion thing, but I think that it works pretty good, and you're not fighting with, when you water your plants, having standing water in your dishes, and then you have to go dump that out, and it's just, I hate doing that because I always spill it and it doesn't go well. Yeah. Yeah.
For the hanging plants, you would take those down every time you plant.
Yep. Yeah. We have like a plastic dish that hooks to the pot. But again, you're fighting with the like water sitting in it, and you have to go dump it out. What I like to do with hanging plants with watering is use pot covers. So do you know what I'm talking about? It's so pots just without a hole. Yeah, where you see them, you're like, why doesn't this have a hole? It's because what you're meant to do is take, you know, this and just put it in there, and then you just take it out and water it, and then put it back. If you have, you know, a hanging plant that's pretty, like the ivy, it's kind of crazy and you can't get it out for the macrame a lot of times, or out from wherever it's hanging on. If you are careful and you learn the right amount of water, you can just water it in the thing, and it just takes some practice, and you just have to kind of do a little bit and then watch and a little bit and watch and just see when it starts dripping, and you kind of learn how much, and then you just have like, you know, that much, and it evaporates. You just don't want them sitting in, you know, a lot of water. And there is plants that would like to be sitting in water or could tolerate it. Elephant ears, like this guy back here, and then we have another kind of elephant ear too. This one doesn't get very big, but that wouldn't mind sitting in water. The other elephant ears wouldn't mind it either. I think this one's alocasia, those ones are colocasia, the other way around. I can't remember right now. But those wouldn't mind that. So that's a good plant to have in a pot cover. For the hanging plants, I just honestly take mine down. I just take them down, the whole unit, the macrame and all, and just stick it in the sink and water it. And then it's nice because you can just like leave it there. I'll do it and then I'll like go do laundry or run an errand or whatever, and then I come back, it's dry, it's drained out, and you hang it back up and it's no problem. And I mean, I haven't really found a better solution for that than that. I like how that works because you can let it dry out. So it's not dripping on your carpet or your wood floor or whatever.
Can I piggyback on that question just with watering, and you might have covered this in the first one, but what do you recommend for plant storage and like for watering? Because I will just take it and put it in the sink, like every single one, and they all drain out of the bottom. I don't have them sitting in anything. So I don't know, like all of my plants are in different type of watering situations. So
Yeah.
Is there a best like way I should handle that?
So you're asking like if there's a better way than putting them in the sink, or are you asking about the scheduling for it?
Yeah, better than putting them in the sink. Like, should I be getting plates to put under with the drainage so that I can water them where they are and not have to carry them? Or?
Yeah, you can. That's certainly fine to do that. I use trays on certain ones that I know can sit in the water. I like terracotta for that reason, because you put a tray under it and you have your plant in terracotta, and if you accidentally put a little bit too much water and there's an inch or so of water sitting in there, the terracotta will soak it up. There's certain plants that aren't going to want to tolerate that. Some plants, they don't like. You probably couldn't do that with a succulent. I do it with my abutilons because those things are just thirsty, and I wish I didn't put them in terracotta, but I did. So I just give them a lot of water, and I leave about that much, and I figure, okay, they got water for the next couple days, and it's totally taboo, but it kind of drags it out a little bit longer, so that you don't have to. They dry out. I usually have to water them twice a week, and it pushes it out another like 2 days, so I don't have to worry about it. So trays. What I'm trying to say is trays are a good thing for certain plants. There's certain plants where you're defeating the purpose because you have to dump the tray out. So you might as well just take the plant to the sink. And picking plants that will tolerate sitting in water for, a day or 2 days in terracotta I usually do that. Most tropicals are going to tolerate that. I do that with my Xanadu philodendron, and it loves it. It doesn't seem to mind. So, there's like the Chinese evergreens are not going to tolerate any sitting in water at all. A cast iron plant, not going to tolerate that. So it's just going to depend. So those plants, you get a dish, but you're going to have to dump the dish out anyways. So you might as well just
Do it. Okay.
Yeah.
That's good to know.
I spent a lot of time dumping out dishes, and I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I buying all these dishes and then doing what I could have done, which is take the plant to the sink.
Good to know.
So, yeah. And then it's easy to just clean your sink out, In a smaller space, it is way easier to maintain humidity and light. So, if you just have one room where there is, like you have your one shelf, or, you have this one room that's your plant room, it's easy to just put a humidifier in there and maintain the humidity. It's easy to have a mister bottle and go through and just mist everybody in the morning, rather than walking around your entire apartment or house or dorm or whatever and just kind of spraying each plant with a spray bottle. So that's just kind of an advantage of gardening in a small space. And I think that's why the shelf thing, having all your plants on one big shelf, is kind of becoming trendy, is they really do like it. They like being closer together. I find that my plants that I keep in that area versus the one that I put, in my kitchen or somewhere else, they seem to be happier. I don't know, I guess, I assume it's because they increase the humidity in the area because they're, you know, transpiring water out. So I assume that's why, but in my heart, I think that they talk to each other probably. So, light levels, we talked about that. Light levels are a little bit easier to maintain in a smaller space because you just put, you know, 1 or 2 lights up. We have really nice plant lights that they're huge, they're like this big. And I mean, one of those would do you for a whole area, like as big as this, full of plants. Otherwise, LEDs, and you want the brightest possible. So you'll see like 4000K or 4500K, and that's about, I think that's usually the brightest I've ever been able to find. And definitely LEDs because they don't burn. And the closer you can get them, the better. And that's why LEDs are better, is because it doesn't burn the plant. But if they get too close, they will burn. Something to keep plants smaller is to water them less. There's certain plants you can't do that with, like this Abutilon here. He's coming back. He needed a little bit of water, but these do not tolerate drought. So that's not something you could necessarily do that with, but things like Chinese evergreen, snake plant, succulents, the less you water them, the less they're gonna grow. So if you push them to their limit of water, then you're not gonna see as much growth, and they're not gonna outgrow their space, or you know, they're not gonna grow into everybody else if they're on a shelf. And you kind of just have to get a feel for it. Each plant's gonna be a little bit different where its threshold is. Some plants' threshold is huge. You have a lot of gray area there where you have a lot of wiggle room of, oh, it's too dry, it's fine. And there's other plants where it goes too dry, and in an hour it's, you know, crispy. Like maidenhair fern, crispy. Most ferns will get crispy pretty quick. The only one that may be an exception is the staghorn fern. I've noticed I can let dry out pretty far. Calatheas won't tolerate it at all, no dryness, but they don't get big anyways. But your succulents, it's a really easy way to keep them from getting out of control. Okay, so then we'll talk about the pruning. Plants that are vigorous, but you want them anyways, but you want them to stay smaller, you gotta prune them in the spring. And most plants that are that vigorous, Abutilon's an example. Fern isn't a super good example. The ivy is a good example. Pothos is a good example. Those things you can really like prune back. Philodendrons, you can whack those really far and it refreshes them a little bit. And you sort of start with a baby plant again. And so you don't have to fight this giant thing, you know. I have one in my bathroom and it's like on a window, and it got to the point, I mean, when I hung it up, it was like, you know, maybe about that big, covered the window. And it got to the point where it was like touching the ground, and it was like you'd be, you know, going potty and it's like touching your face, and it's like, okay, had enough of this. So I brought it here and I whacked it in half, and it's starting new growth and it's perfectly happy. So a lot of plants will tolerate that. Most viney things, Chinese evergreens, you couldn't do that to those. Most ferns you can do that too, actually. You can just cut them all the way down to the ground and they'll completely refresh. It's amazing how plants can just come back from nothing.
We have to do that in the spring though.
Yeah, I break that rule sometimes, but I know that I break it here mostly because we have heat and airflow, and I know they're gonna get enough water. And sometimes we leave the lights, it doesn't really help that much, but because the environment's different than your house, sometimes I'll do it, but only if like I'm desperate. And like my plant, I just did that recently because I was just desperate, and I don't care if it grows weird because I'll just cut it back again in the spring. The reason you do that is because our day length just isn't, we just don't have enough day for them to grow shoots that are even, that they don't develop correctly because they don't have enough light to develop correctly. They can't make the nutrients that they need to grow, and then you get stretching. So the growth on it now is, it's a Brazil philodendron, and it's completely reverted to yellow. And the distance between the leaves is huge. So that's just what I'll cut it back again in the spring. But it usually results in a not normal looking plant. It won't kill it, but it'll look weird. So, and then kind of tied to pruning is putting them outside in the summer. That's a really good way to make a little bit more space. And then when you bring them back in the fall, you're like, oh yay, I've gained all these plants. But it, it clears out your house, and they get to refresh, so you can prune things back. You put them outside, and they're really happy that they're outside, and they grow a bunch, and it kind of gives you a break from being crowded by plants. At least in my house, I get kind of crowded by plants, and I bring most of them outside. And when you have plants in a small space, over the winter you can really kind of cram them, because if you have a normal environment of a house in winter, they'll go a little bit dormant in winter, and so you're not going to be doing a whole lot of growing. They're not going to be doing much, so it's okay to have them a little bit crammed. And then you put them outside in the summer, and they can kind of breathe a little bit and refresh themselves. So,
like uncovered for the sun to hit them, and like rain when it does rain in the summer?
Well, it's going to depend on the plant. Oh. Certain plants are going to love the sun. Certain plants won't. Like, what plant did I do that with? A calathea. I put it under my porch is already shady enough, but when I had a sunny porch, I would put it under my porch chair. And so it got shade, but it also got to be outside. And even though it's in the shade outside, the amount of light, much more light it's getting than in your house, it's way more light, just because you don't have the windows and shades or whatever breaking up that light. So it's just, they like it. It's happy out there. Most plants, you're not going to want to move directly into full sun. They aren't going to be used to that. So you want to go, if it's a plant that eventually will be in full sun, you'd put it on like the north side of your house where it's bright, but there's no direct sun. And then you'd put it in sun. And it'd be like a 2-week transition. But any plant, like a calathea or a peace lily, you just put it in the shade somewhere, and it can just stay there pretty much all summer. The only problem you fight there is pests. You bring pests back in your house, but that's a whole nother, putting your plants outside and bringing them back in is a whole nother class we're gonna do. So, and it's kind of fun. I like it. And it makes your porch, your front porch or back patio or whatever, really fun and tropical in the summer. So yeah. Any questions? Comments? Thoughts? What plants do you guys have at home that are small space plants?
I have a snake plant.
Snake plant?
One.
The star one, yeah. Oh, he got ripped.
Because it's so cool, because in the morning, when it goes down and up.
Yeah.
So it's really fun.
Yeah. I like to cram those ones together because they go up.
Yeah.
And then they spread back out during the day.
My cast iron you told me last month.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it's doing well.
Good.
And I have a shamrock that's kind of touch and go.
Yeah.
And some succulents that I've
Oh yeah.
I don't.
Succulents.
I don't blame you for killing the succulents. Yeah. I think I think one of our classes is on succulents. I'd like to do a class on succulents because
Their plants too.
me, you know what? Me too. I just threw one in the garbage like last week. It was really sad. They either rot or they dry up, and I can't. It's here I can take care of them, but I think at home I forget about them.
Might be a dumb question, but the spray bottle you mentioned, and I've seen people do that, but I've never done that, and I don't know anything
The Mister
about
bottle?
how to do that or why or.
I wish I had one. They're so neat. I have one, and I just do it on my like really high maintenance plants, like the calatheas, because I have a humidifier too. But you push the trigger of the spray bottle, and it sprays for like, I don't know, maybe 5 seconds. So it's really, you're not sitting there just like spraying like over and over again until your wrist and your whole hand hurts. So it's nice, and it comes out in, I think, like a finer mist. So it's better for the plants, because most plants, they want ambient humidity, but they don't want water on their leaves, really. They'll tolerate it, but they're not gonna like having constantly wet leaves. So, and that's, if you get a humidifier, be careful where you put it, because if it's blowing directly onto somebody's leaf, you're gonna see probably a little bit of rot eventually.
And do you do that often for all of your plants? The spray
I have a humidifier going constantly. They're in an area probably about as big as where I'm sitting. And then I have shelves, and then I have hanging, and I have a humidifier nestled in there, kind of like pointed away from them. But I do the mister a few times a week just to kind of supplement it. Our climate is just so dry that you can't mist your plants too much. So, and anytime I think about it, and I don't hold still pretty much ever. I've been fidgeting this whole time. And so when I'm like brushing my teeth or like, doing something kind of idle, or like in between laundry, I'll just like go up and like mist my plants real quick, and it's easy to do when you're doing something else because it's just so quick, because you're not sitting there just like spraying your plant for 20 minutes. And they really like it. They do. So, what plants do you have?
I have some succulents. I actually bought this one,
Oh,
but it was
Hello.
like the mother plant, and I have gotten 17 baby ones
Uh-huh.
with that.
the hen and chicks are kind of nuts.
And I also have like a croton, umbrella, tree.
Yeah,
I just bought the Wandering Jew, and I'm so excited about it.
yeah.
It grows so fast.
That's one that you can really whack back super hard. And you can keep them really, really bushy that way. So I have one, actually that's a good image, is the Wandering Jew over there, the one that's tighter, I pinched, and the other one I didn't. And the difference is, when I planted it, I pinched it, and the other one, I don't remember why I didn't do it. I think I did it on purpose. I don't remember. But I didn't pinch that one, and you can tell the difference. And so, pinch them. I mean, you can cut them back pretty far, and they'll really get really dense and look really pretty.
I bought it like a week ago. It's like a picture when I bought it, and then
Yeah.
I took a picture. It had been 6 days, and I'm pretty certain it's grown at least a quarter, if
Yeah.
not more of an inch.
Yeah, they grow really fast. Well, that's good. I'm glad it's happy. All right. Any more questions? I think that wraps it up. Thank you, guys.